I'm sorry to rub salt in the wound after that 44-point loss, Laker fans, but I'm here to tell you today that Magic Johnson is not a top 10 player in NBA history, in my opinion, and the reason why I'm doing this now is not just to hurt you when you're already suffering after that, again, 44-point loss to the 76ers, but it is because I am quite annoyed when I see people regularly put Magic in their top 5. I think that putting Magic on the lower end of the top 10 is completely valid. Plenty of people do it. I did it for a very long time myself, and even now I only have him just outside the top 10, which I'm going to explain. But when I see people have him top 5, it just makes me wonder, do some of y'all even know basketball? So let's talk about Magic Johnson's incredible, absolutely incredible career and why he is just outside of my top 10 players all time. To start off, let me be clear here that I will be nitpicking Magic's career in this case because we are comparing him to the other 12 greatest players of all time. In my opinion, the top 13 are in sort of a tier of their own above the rest of the competition, and these are the guys we are comparing Magic Johnson to when we talk about his career. So while he is absolutely phenomenal, one of the absolute best players of all time, we are comparing him to the very, very best, and therefore even small criticisms of him are valid, because all most of these guys have are small criticisms. None of them would be up here if they had massive, massive flaws within their game. With that out of the way, let's actually start talking about Magic Johnson here. For his career, Magic averaged 20 points, 11 assists, 7 rebounds, and 2 steals, and he did this on 52, 30, 85 splits. Magic had 11 seasons, which I would consider part of his prime, where he was a legitimate star in the NBA, and his absolute peak came in 1987, where he averaged 24, 12, 6, and 2 on 52% shooting, while leading what was, until the 2017 Warriors, the best offense in NBA history, to 65 wins and a relatively easy title in a rematch with the Boston Celtics, the tiebreaker for Magic to be 2-1 over Larry Bird during his career. And finally, Magic Johnson is widely regarded as a minimum top 5 passer and playmaker in NBA history, with many people having him top 3 or even number 1. And I would personally say he was the best passer of all time, and at minimum, again, a top 5 playmaker. I'm not sure if I would put him top 3. It's incredibly close with guys like Curry, Jokic, Michael Jordan. We can debate the true definition of playmaking another time, but the point is, have him very, very high on the passer and playmakers list. Absolutely incredible in that area. That was the best area of Magic Johnson's game. However, this brings me to my first nitpick with Magic's career, being his scoring. While Magic Johnson was a very good scorer, I would say he was at best the second worst scorer out of my top 13. And just for reference here, we are talking about LeBron James, Michael Jordan, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Wilt Chamberlain, Bill Russell, Tim Duncan, Kobe Bryant, Shaq, Hakeem, Curry, Jerry West, and of course, Larry Bird. Those are the 12 other players competing with Magic for this top 10 location, and Bill Russell is the only one of those players who I would say was a worse scorer than Magic Johnson. Not that he was bad by any means, he was pretty efficient on pretty good volume, but he was by no means an all-time great. And a similar thing can be said about Magic's defense, where I would say out of these 13 players, he was the second worst defender significantly, only ahead of Steph Curry, and the gap between them on that end really isn't as large as many people might think. Magic, despite being 6'9" and pretty darn athletic, was not a great defensive player. He couldn't really move well enough laterally to keep up with guards on the perimeter, and he was giving up a big strength advantage against most opposing forwards and bigs. So he ended up being a pretty much neutral defender throughout his career, which is not bad, but again, not great either when we are comparing you to the very best players ever, most of whom are legitimate two-way forces. Once again, we go to look at peaks, and Magic Johnson probably has the second or third worst peak out of any of these top 13 players, maybe even the worst. The only guys I would say he might have a better peak than are Steph Curry and Kobe Bryant. Lakers fans, I swear, I'm not trying to hate on your team right now. I'm just being honest, okay? I'm just being honest. I'm not coming after you. But Magic Johnson's peak, not the best out of this group, and longevity isn't a win for him either, as he has one of the lowest longevities out of any of these players. 11 seasons, like I said, of prime / years where he was playing like a legitimate star. And while that's a good amount of seasons for any normal star player, we are looking at the best players ever, and only a couple other guys in that top 13 have less longevity than Magic Johnson, and those who do still beat him in terms of peak. And I am aware that Magic Johnson probably would have had several more years of star caliber play had he not been forced to retire early due to HIV, but unfortunately we cannot rank players based on hypotheticals. We can only rank them based on what they actually did, and in his actual real life career, Magic certainly did not have all-time great level longevity. Finally, let's talk about the winning, because Magic Johnson is without a doubt one of the greatest winners in NBA history. The man had 3 MVPs, 5 championship rings, and 3 finals MVPs. But despite all of this, I don't think the difficulty of his rings and finals appearances stack up all that well against other all-time greats. Magic Johnson played on some of the most stacked teams in the history of the NBA in a very weak 1980s Western Conference. Magic was not even the best player on his team for about half of the championship series they won, and even in 1980 when he won the Finals MVP thanks to one of, if not the greatest games in NBA history in Game 6, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was the clear, far and away best player on the team and on the court in the first 5 games of that series, and Magic only won because of one game which Kareem missed with an injury. People always like to criticize all-time great players for the fantastic help they had on their teams, and most of them do. Very rarely does a player win a championship without a great roster around them. But it is one thing to have a very good supporting cast, and it's another thing to be making the finals every year in, and again, extremely weak Western Conference. One of the weakest conferences in NBA history in the 80s West, with one of the most stacked teams all time. The 1980s Lakers were basically the 2018-2019 Golden State Warriors for an entire decade where Magic was not the best player on the team. During the first half, it was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, so it's hard for me to rank his titles and his many finals appearances all that highly when you look at the phenomenal help he had, especially considering he was a somewhat inconsistent playoff performer as well. I'm not saying he was bad by any means, I would say he was a pretty standard playoff performer, but he did have some great games like Game 6 in 1980 Finals, and he had some terrible performances like in the 1984 Finals against the Boston Celtics, where he got the nickname Tragic Johnson. And just like his scoring and defense and the massive amount of help he had in a very weak Western Conference, Magic's postseason performances are not a negative on his career, but they just don't stack up as highly and as well as most other all-time great players. The only guys who were really worse than Magic in the playoffs were Wilt Chamberlain, one of the greatest chokers in NBA history, and then maybe guys like Larry Bird, Steph Curry, or even Kobe Bryant if you want to go that far, but overall these other players just outperformed him in the postseason. And for all of these reasons, I have come to the personal conclusion that Magic Johnson is not one of my top 10 players of all time. He is just outside of that best of the best upper echelon of players, while still being one of the absolute all-time greats. Thank you all for watching this video, and if you disagree with any of my points, please let me know in the comments. I would be happy to discuss them further.